I declare war. Now, ordinarily, I would do this video on my New Possibilities channel, but I'm blocked from doing I declare war. Hold on one second. Now, sorry about that. But as I was saying, ordinarily, I would do this live stream on my New Possibilities channel, but because my live streams have been blocked on that channel for 90 days, I believe, I'm doing this video right now on this channel, this live stream on this channel. And what I want to talk about is this debate that I saw between Tariq Nasheed and Jesse Lee Peterson. I want to share my thoughts, and also for the people who are tuning in, if you had a chance to watch that debate, I would like to hear what you all have to say about it as well. So let's get right into it. But before I do that, let me just say a couple of things about something that really is not the subject matter of this video. As you all know, I did a couple of videos about this guy Haven Bullets, challenging him to do a live stream. He came up with some excuses about why he didn't receive the notice or whatever, you know, despite the fact that I messaged him, despite the fact that I left comments on his video, and despite the fact that fellow subscribers left comments on his video as well, letting them know about the live stream. He claims that he didn't have notice. You know, he also did a video where he was saying, well, the best way to get in touch with him is through video, you know, through his email. So I emailed him today, and I told him that I would be available at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and I didn't receive any response. Like he acted like, you know, I had been in regular communication with him via email when we only had one email exchange a while ago. So it wasn't like that was instantly accessible or something that I immediately thought about. But anyway, I sent him the email today, and there was no response to that, you know, no confirmation that this time works or anything like that. So I did not do a live stream on him. You know, I didn't set that up because I didn't get confirmation from him that that time works. So anyway, I decided to go ahead and proceed with another topic. But if he shows up and he wants to talk about, you know, whatever, then I can, you know, I'll briefly interrupt this broadcast, and, you know, we can briefly have a conversation with him about these particular issues. But I just want to put that out there. You know, obviously I'm not running, you know, obviously I sent the information to him, but yet he comes up with all these excuses. I'm sure he's going to have an excuse as to why he didn't respond to his email. You know, say it probably went to junk mail. But I'm moving on. You know, I'm moving on beyond that guy and his subject, you know, and that whole subject dealing with him. You know, as far as I'm concerned, you know, if people want to deal with him, that's their business or whatever. You know, I think he's suspect for all the reasons that I mentioned before. But anyway, I just wanted to get that off my chest before I got into this video. And I just want you all to let me know if you can hear me okay. There's a few people tuning in before I go any further. So this debate was real interesting between Tariq Nasheed and Jesse Lee Peterson. You know, they had a civil discussion, an interesting discussion. And I just want to highlight a couple of the points that were raised during that discussion. And one of the points that Tariq Nasheed raised was this. He basically asserted that white supremacists are smarter than black people as a collective. And he also said white supremacists are even smarter than him. So I'm going to respond to that whole notion. But first, I want to shout out Elaine Lloyd. Thanks for tuning in. Yeah, I would love to debate. Well, I mean, I don't think it'd be much of a challenge to debate Jesse Lee Peterson, but I wouldn't mind debating him. But, you know, in terms of whether or not these white supremacists are smarter than black people as a collective, I don't think that they are smarter, you know, and I think that this whole notion of white supremacy is, you know, I don't think it's a complete or well thought out concept. First of all, I don't think, our biggest threat is quote unquote white supremacy. Shout out to Simply Deep 1985. But I don't think that our biggest threat is white supremacy. I think that white supremacy is a tool used by the power elite to maintain power. White supremacy is just, something that's used to divide people and to oppress people. The system that is really oppressing people is the system of capitalism. And the extension of capitalism is imperialism, as pointed out in Lenin's book, Imperialism, the Last Stage of Capitalism. And racism is a means to divide people, to oppress people. And racism became necessary in order to justify, the enslavement of African people. And when you look at the history of slavery, you see that it was driven by profit. It was driven by a need to have cheap labor. And it was all about profit because all these different industries in America and Europe profited off of the slave trade, whether we're talking about insurance industries, banking industries, the industries that put together the boats to ship slaves from the African continent. There was all kinds of profit being made. Profit from the government actually profited off of slavery by using slave labor. So you had many people in many different institutions and different types of businesses that profited from slavery. So it was in their interest to maintain slavery as an institution. And that's something that few people realize. People are focused on white supremacy, not realizing that really white supremacy is only a tool used by the power elite to maintain power. And I don't think it's a matter of these people being any smarter than Black people as a collective. They simply have resources that Black people don't have. They simply have money and wealth and different avenues to control and dominate society. I don't think it's a matter of those people being smarter. I mean, if you own and control the means of production, if you own and control the media, if you have influence in terms of elected officials, you're able to wield your influence over them through campaign donations, and you have a powerful military that's willing to back up your business interests and your political interests, you're able to wield power. And I don't think that it comes down to these people being more intelligent than Black people. I think that too often what happens is we give these white supremacists too much credit. We give racists and we give the power elite too much credit. And while we condemn white supremacy, by claiming that these people are smarter than Black people, in a sense, you are endorsing this notion of white supremacy on a in a subtle kind of way. That's what you're essentially doing. So that's my problem with that. Even though I understand his point about how they're able to control and dominate people and stuff like that, the people that are in control of this country, the dominant force in the world, the ruling power elite, they are intelligent. No one is doubting their intelligence, but to put them above Black people and suggest that somehow they're more intelligent than Black people, that's giving them too much credit. They're not more intelligent. They just have more power because of the things that they control. So that's one issue that I took exception with in that interview. Also, I found it's not surprising, but before I go on to this next point, I'm going to look through your comments real quick. Shout out to Elaine Lloyd. Shout out to Simply Deep. Shout out to W. Parsons. Shout out to Cocoa Butter. Shout out to Jamar's Room. Yeah, so let me look at your comments before I go on to the next point. W. Parsons said, just look at history. It's repeating itself. Cocoa Butter said, we've been locked out of everything. And Elaine Lloyd said this is, the same stuff by a different name. It never stopped. Immediately after slavery, there were the black codes, then the prison system, the prison leave system. Yeah, I mean, the oppression of black people has evolved over time. It's, taken on new names and new forms, and I think that's a prime example of that, how after slavery, they set up a system to basically continue slavery in a different form and different name, through the black codes, as you pointed out, where they made all kinds of activities illegal and stuff like that, through Jim Crow. And then also you had the sharecropping system that was set up, which is virtually a new form of slavery. And then, with the mass incarceration of black people back then, the way they made many things illegal, thereby criminalizing blackness, where black people would be locked up for minor offenses and locked out of all kinds of opportunities and forced to work literally as slaves. That's one of the few forms of slavery that's allowed in this country, is when somebody has been convicted of a crime. And that's what they essentially did, was use the criminal justice system as a system of new slavery. So, yeah, I mean, it's just important to understand that. And then one of the things that Jesse Lee Peterson said that was just outright ridiculous, he was talking about how during Jim Crow, during segregation, he said black people didn't complain about racism. Black people weren't victims. They didn't view themselves as victims and all that kind of stuff. And they just strived and they were still good people and all that. Obviously, we have managed to survive under all the different circumstances in which we lived, whether we were segregated, even under segregation, black people managed to build some institutions and some businesses and all that kind of stuff. Even under that form of oppression, black people were still able to strive. But the notion that black people did not complain about segregation or racism and all that kind of stuff, that's just ridiculous. I mean, as Tariq Nasheed pointed out, I mean, you wouldn't have a civil rights movement if black people didn't complain. That whole civil rights movement was about black people standing up against racism and segregation and all that kind of stuff. So the notion that black people didn't complain back then is ridiculous. And this guy is he basically is denying history. This is a prime example of somebody trying to rewrite history. It's a prime example of revisionism. Now, another thing that was real interesting in that discussion was when Jesse Lee Peterson asked Tariq Nasheed about his position on interracial relationships, if he has any problem with it. And Tariq Nasheed basically said, well, he doesn't have a problem if a black guy dates a white woman or marries a white woman, just as long as he's not a coon. But the thing that makes that odd is that, this guy refers to some black women as bed wenches and all that stuff when they date and marry outside of the race. But for some reason, he doesn't have that kind of vitriol towards black men who date outside of their race. And I find that to be hypocritical. I mean, but I'm not surprised that he would say this. I mean, he's made other statements that have made it clear that this is his position. He's on tape where he's talking about like how he would have sex with a white woman and this and that. And he's actually posed in pictures pretending to be a pimp, and he's had some white women in those pictures and stuff like that. So I'm not surprised that that's the case, that he would be okay with that. But it just doesn't fit that narrative, this black nationalist type of posture that he presents in a lot of his commentary and just in his documentaries. His documentaries promote this idea of black pride and black unity and all this and that. And, condemnation of black women who date outside of their race. That's something that you hear him, referring to people as bed wenches and this and that. But for some reason, he's tolerant when black men date outside of the race and marry outside of the race. And that's problematic because, if somebody is truly about black pride and black unity, it seems like they would they would encourage black people to marry within the race. It seems like that would be a priority for them. It seems like if you're going to put out there, this black pride and black unity and, melanated nation, this and that, it seems like part of that would be encouraging black love and encouraging black men to be with black women and vice versa, especially given the fact that it's the black man who is dating outside of the race and marrying outside of the race more than the black woman. So it seems like the emphasis should really be on trying to instill a sense of pride in the black man and the black community so that black people will rebuild the black family. And, that brings me to a point, like one thing that they talked about in that area was the issue of why do black men do this? Why do black people date outside of the race? And one thing that Tariq Nasheed brought up was just the programming, like in the media and all that kind of stuff, how people are taught that, somehow the white woman is the standard of beauty. We're taught and through film and all that kind of stuff that the white woman is all this and all that. And then they present negative images of black women and stuff like that, and not a lot of positive images of black women. So for that reason, people are taught to gravitate more towards this white woman. And Jesse Lee Peterson tried to bring up this issue about how the black mother is raising her sons. He was trying to suggest that somehow that kind of attitude where you elevate the white woman is because they didn't have a good upbringing in their household, that because their mother didn't treat them right or didn't educate them right or guide them right. That's the reason why they have this inclination to get a white woman and all that stuff. And basically, they were pointing out how Tariq Nasheed was basically saying, well, no, that's not the case. Like, regardless of how someone may be raised or how they are taught within the household, when they step outside into the larger world, there's still programming. Like when they turn on their television, there's still programming. When they watch a movie, there's still programming. People are being programmed to idolize whiteness and to hate their blackness. So, and I thought that was a good point. Like he talked about, like he drew a comparison between that and, for instance, people smoking and stuff like that. Someone may live in a household where their parents tell them, don't smoke, smoking is bad for you and all this and that. But yet they see on television people smoking and looking cool. They see in the magazines that smoking looks glamorous or cool or elegant. And because of that kind of advertising, even if their parents told them that smoking is not good for you and all this and that, they still will, some people will still be inclined to be tempted to smoke and all that kind of stuff and end up being a smoker. So, I think that that's a valid point. That people are not just influenced by their household, they're influenced by the larger society. They're influenced by the messages that they receive in the larger society. So I thought that was a good point. But I just find it odd that he would be making that point at the same time while he's, talking about how he doesn't have any problem with black men dating outside of their race. So, that's one point that I want to make. I'm going to go to the comments real quick and then continue on. No, Jesse said, Elaine Lloyd said he only said one crazy thing. No, he said a lot of crazy things. And the interview was about 40-something minutes long. When I get a chance, I'll post a link in the card so people could check it out. Elaine Lloyd said they're all like that. Black men are mad at black women for dating white, and black women are mad at black men who date outside of the race as well. Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, it's a lot of hypocrisy, man. You'll see a lot of guys like making a big deal. Like even some of these misogynistic guys that, even do videos talking about the white woman is all this and all that. These same people will have, something to say about black women who swirl. And Cocoa Butter said, white women have always been put on a pedestal throughout history. Yeah, that's true. I mean, unfortunately, it's true, man. It's like that's what people have been taught to gravitate towards, and they've been taught that the white woman is some kind of standard of beauty, that she's some kind of symbol of success. Like if somebody makes it, like often you'll see these black celebrities who become famous and rich and all that kind of stuff, and the first thing that they do is they drop the black woman and they pursue some white woman or some other non-black woman, or somebody who is, a black woman who's very fair, someone who can virtually pass for white. But, I just thought it was like crazy that guy, Jesse Lee Peterson, would try to blame the whole situation on black women. But, that's common. I mean, you see that a lot here on YouTube where some black men blame black women for everything. They blame black women for the destruction of the black community. And now you have this guy, Jesse Lee Peterson, blaming the black woman for black men deciding to date outside of their race, blaming black mothers for not raising their children properly and this and that, resulting in them dating outside of the race. And, that's just another example of misogyny, man. It's just another example or another expression of hatred towards women. One thing that I also heard during this discussion is they talked about, politics. Like, one thing that came up was like whether or not Tariq Nasheed was a conservative or a liberal, because Jesse Lee Peterson asked him about that election in Alabama for the U.S. Senate. And he basically pointed out how, how a lot of people were against Roy Moore. Well, actually, he brought it up because Tariq Nasheed was talking about how this guy, Charles Barkley, won one of those Coon Awards. And, and the guy was like, really? Like Charles Barkley, you see him as a coon? And then, Jesse Lee Peterson was saying, well, Charles Barkley was encouraging people not to vote for the Republican Roy Moore. So basically, Charles Barkley is in the same camp as you on certain issues. So why are you, putting him in this category of coon? And Tariq Nasheed went out of his way to point out how he's not a liberal, he's more conservative. And, he pointed out how he thinks Martin Luther King was a Republican. I've read somewhere that Martin Luther King was not a Republican. That's a common myth that he was a Republican. When I get a chance, I'll post a link in the description box to a source explaining that Martin Luther King was not a Republican. Like that's something that's circulated everywhere. You hear it a lot. It's one of the talking points used by these conservatives to try to get black people to become Republicans. And also during that discussion, Jesse Lee Peterson asked Tariq Nasheed if he would have voted for, I think it was Doug Jones or Roy Moore, and he said he wouldn't vote for Roy Moore because Roy Moore is a racist. And, he's a racist. I did a prior video on my New Possibilities channel pointing out how this guy, Roy Moore, thought that America was great during slavery. He talked about how families were together and America was wonderful during slavery for the most part. So obviously this guy is a racist. And what Tariq Nasheed was saying was basically, well, I'm not going to vote for Doug Jones simply because, he's running against a racist. And, while I understand what he's saying, when you have an election and you have a choice, not voting is, in fact, voting. By not voting, you are making it possible for people like a Roy Moore to get elected. So, I think that analysis is faulty. First of all, you have to look at the cost and benefits of candidates. You have to look at the positives and negatives. And comparing those two candidates, it's not even close. You have one candidate who is an accused child molester, somebody that's a racist, somebody that talked about how slavery was when America was great. And you have another person on the other hand who actually litigated cases against the KKK. There's no contest there. So the notion that, this guy, Tariq Nasheed, was suggesting that he wouldn't vote for either candidate, I just think that that's silly, man. And it reflects a level of political immaturity. And, I'm not surprised, because during the election, Tariq Nasheed had a "Don't Vote" campaign, which is absolutely silly and ridiculous and frankly self-defeating. It didn't serve any purpose. All it did was help elect Donald Trump. And at the same time, like after the election, you had this guy Tariq Nasheed and other Black people who discouraged African Americans from voting. All of a sudden now they're complaining about how Donald Trump is a white supremacist and et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, I just think that that's, it's crazy, man. I think that we need to be politically engaged. We need to weigh all of our options, be informed about the issues, informed about the candidates in every single election, on the local level, on the state level, and on the federal level. And I just think that his approach to politics is just immature and not informed, and it's unfortunate that a lot of people follow his example when it comes to the politics thing. So I'm going to look at the comments before I go on, and then I'm going to move on to the next points that I wanted to highlight before I close out. There's just a couple of other points that I want to make about the discussion. Shout out to Carbonated Onyx. Shout out to Jehovah's Dragon 3. I'm going to go back and look at your comments. Shout out to Psychopatheus. All right. So let me scroll back through the comments before I move on to the next point. Yeah, I don't understand why, this person is bringing up all this irrelevant stuff. So I'm just going to remove you. Let me see if I can. Okay, so yeah, because like this person was making all these irrelevant comments that had nothing to do with anything we're talking about now. So I had to take him out. Just bear with me a second. Cocoa Butter said we're blamed for bad weather. Yeah, they blame Black women for everything. Psychopathia says that was hilarious. And I don't know if he's referring to that guy left all those comments. Yeah, so Psychopathia is saying that Martin Luther King was a Republican. And I've heard that before, but I've read somewhere that that's not true. So I'm going to Google it real quick. Because I know that that's a talking point that a lot of conservatives use. I know I read somewhere. Yeah, here it is right here. I'm going to share my screen in a second. I don't know how these myths get so popular that everybody keeps saying them, and people just end up believing them, and they run with them. So I'm gonna do a couple of Google searches and show y'all my screen. So you had this article right here from Think Progress. It says, no, Martin Luther King was not a Republican, but this is what he had to say about them. So this article points out how many people talk about King being a Republican, and a lot of conservatives on Twitter and elsewhere push that point. Even King's niece and all that kind of stuff, who's a Republican. And this article points out that King was not a Republican or a Democrat. He was not a partisan and never endorsed any political candidate. And it quotes King saying this in 1958. King said, I don't think the Republican Party is full of Almighty God, nor is the Democratic Party. They both have weaknesses. And I'm not bound to either party. That's what King is quoted as saying. And then he said this about the Republican Party during the he was talking about the 1964 Republican convention. He said the Republican Party geared its appeal and program to racism, reaction, and extremism. That's how he described the Republican Party that all these people keep saying that King belonged to. So that's one example. Let me see. And then you have other people trying to say that he was a Republican. Let me see what this article is saying. So I may do a whole video on this, depending on. So right here, it talks about how people are saying King was a Republican. He opposed affirmative action, and he grew radical near the end of his life, and he considered renouncing nonviolence. So he said none of those. This article points out how none of those statements are true. They're all bogus. So I'm going to go through the myth dealing with him being a Republican. It points out how this idea that King was a Republican is one of those things that never will die. And it points out this. It quotes. Let's see, who they quote. It's quoting a man by the name of Baldwin. It says, Dr. King never believed in any kind of political identification. He never allowed himself to become closely aligned with partisan politics. He occasionally said that both the Democratic and Republican Party had betrayed his people. So those are two sources that contest this notion that King was a Republican. Here's another article right here in PolitiFact. No, King was not a Republican. And they said, check it out. We checked with King biographers and found that King avoided partisan identification. So there you have it. I mean, so I don't know why this myth is just like on, and people continue to regurgitate it, man. And it's just a shame that you had Tariq Nasheed, spreading that misinformation. Saying that he was a Martin Luther King, even though Martin Luther King wasn't a Republican. So let me highlight a couple of other points. And I know some Black people were Republicans, I understand that, but King wasn't one of them. I know that a lot of Black people were Republicans because at the time, like in the South, the Democrats were a racist party at one point. I mean, they prevented Black people from even voting and from participating in their primaries and all that kind of stuff. That's the early Democrats. We understand that. We understand their history of racism. The people that were segregationists. Many of the southern states were governed by Democrats, which were called, they were called Dixiecrats. So we all know that history and everything. That history can't be denied. But also what we have to understand is that with the passage of civil rights and all that kind of stuff, the Republican Party began to participate in politics designed to appeal to racist people in the South, and that was called the Southern Strategy. So a lot of the people who were Democrats ended up becoming Republicans. And that's why you see the South today dominated by Republicans. Okay, so hold on one second, y'all. Yeah, so I think I'm gonna make Elaine Lloyd a moderator. Um, Elaine Lloyd said, "I don't think those people are saying not to vote. Know what's going on as far as policy." But hold on one second. I don't think those people are saying not to vote. And she's basically saying that they need to know what's going on as far as politics are concerned. But I mean, Tariq Nasheed actually had a campaign called Don't Vote Campaign. So that's beyond dispute. Like he actually had a campaign encouraging Black people not to vote during the federal election. He wrote an article on his website, Melanated Nation, calling for this campaign. It's something that he was promoting on Twitter and YouTube. Also, you had people like Boyce Watkins downplaying the significance of elections, and you also had Umar Johnson doing the same. And nobody will deny that. Anybody that's familiar with them and watches their content or heard them talk about those issues understands that quite a few of these people promote this idea that voting doesn't matter. A lot of these people that have significant followings, even like what's his name, Robert Perkins, aka the nigga with the tattoos, promoted that. Yeah, that was funny when when Tariq Nasheed gave Jesse Lee Peterson that Coon Train Award. I agree. Psychopathia he gave him an honorary Coon Train Award. Man, that was hilarious. And the funny thing about it was Jesse Lee Peterson was proud to get it. He was like happy to get that Coon Award, man. That was funny. He was like wondering why he didn't win last year. And apparently he got beat out by David Clark, you know, that tap dancing, bootlicking sheriff in Milwaukee. He's no longer a sheriff now. But yeah, man, that was funny. I mean, Tariq is a funny guy, man. I think he's more suited to comedy instead of serious discussion, man. You know, you know, he's a funny guy, man. I have to have to admit that. Like, I don't know how many of y'all have seen that little puppet he's done. Like, he always has the different puppets. Like, you know, he has this now he has this puppet where he's mocking Umar Johnson. That puppet is hilarious, man. He's a funny guy, man. He needs to do stand up or something, man. But yeah, so I'm gonna scroll through more of your comments and then continue on to some of the other comments that were made during that debate. Yeah, that's true. Elaine Lloyd, the parties did switch, as I mentioned before. Exactly. I mean, the Republican of yesteryear was totally different than the Republican Party of today. I mean, that's one of the things you have with these black Republicans, these conservatives. They want to go, in order to talk about things that the Republican Party has done for black people, they have to go all the way back to Reconstruction. I mean, these people have to go all the way back 50 years to talk about Republicans helping to support some civil rights legislation or whatever. But when you ask them what has the Republican Party done in the last 10 years or last 20 years, they can't tell you a damn thing that the Republican Party has done that has been beneficial to the black community. I can tell you what they have done that's been detrimental to the black community, like attacking affirmative action, attacking voting rights, you know, trying to get rid of social programs that benefit poor black communities, getting rid of food stamps and trying to cut back on a Head Start, trying to cut back and eliminate Section 8, things that benefit the black community. So, you know, trying to get rid of the Affordable Care Act, a program that made it possible for many people to be insured, to have health insurance. They want to eliminate that program. So, yeah, they're totally different, man. The Republican Party of yesterday is not the Republican Party of today. I mean, the Republican Party of today elected somebody like Donald Trump, you know, a man that said all these racist things over and over again, a man that is implementing racist policies that are detrimental to black people. And that brings me to another point. Another point that was raised during this discussion. But before I do that, I want to scroll through your comments so I'm not missing anything before I move on. Yeah, and that reminds me of another thing. I see your comment, Ron Hall, and I agree with you. So Ron Hall is saying, as much as I respect Tariq, he is never really strong when debating Republicans. He responds to their nonsense like it's a legitimate point when it's just BS. Yeah, I mean, I think that I just think that he's better suited as an entertainer more so than a debater. You know, I don't think debating is his strong suit. Like when he debated that guy Tucker Carlson, and you know, even with this debate with Jesse Lee Peterson. Even though Jesse Lee Peterson is light work, man, he's not really somebody that would give somebody a run for their money. He's not like a really good debater himself. I think a more challenging debate would be with, somebody like, what's that guy's name? Larry Elder or whatever. Somebody like him would be more challenging to debate. Somebody that's conservative, that understands the issues, somebody that can make, their points well and articulate them well. I think that he would be more of a challenge than a Jesse Lee Peterson. But one thing that got Tariq Nasheed tripped up a little bit in that conversation was, this guy basically asked him if white supremacy is holding him back or is stopping him from doing anything. Jesse Lee Peterson kept asking him that question. And instead of just answering the question, he kept saying, well, they can stop me. They could potentially stop me from doing what I want to do and stuff like that. Because basically this guy, Jesse Lee Peterson's saying, well, you're rich and successful. Why are you complaining about white supremacy? He's basically saying, well, white supremacy is not holding you back from doing anything you want to do. So why are you complaining about white supremacy being such a big problem? And he was basically saying, well, why do you want to take on this victim mentality when here you are, a successful black man in America and stuff like that? Why are you taking on this victim mentality? And so I think that basically what Tariq Nasheed should have done is basically say, well, it's not about me as an individual. He should have went into like the collective plight of black people. Talked about the wealth disparity between black people and white people. Talk about the sentencing disparities between black communities and white people. Talk about the educational disparities between the black community and the white community. Talk about the policing practices that target young black men. Talk about those things in a wider context to make the conversation more than just about him as an individual. Point out how it's about systemic and institutionalized racism and manifests itself in all facets of American life, even healthcare. When we look at the different qualities in healthcare that African Americans receive in this society in terms of life expectancy, in terms of different diseases that impact black communities much harder than they impact other communities. I think he could have went into all of that instead of just saying they can stop me. He was saying, well, they killed Malcolm, they killed other people who were successful and all that kind of stuff. Basically saying that even though I'm not being stopped from doing anything right now, they can stop me at any point. I think that it would have brought home the point if he just talked about how it's not about him as an individual. Of course, there are individuals that are able to succeed in life, but that doesn't deal with the larger issues that impact black people as a collective. So that was just one point that I thought that he should have raised and highlighted instead of allowing this guy, Jesse Lee Peterson, to bring up this red herring and get him knocked off his square by focusing on him as an individual. So let's see where we are. Go through some more of these comments before I go on to these next couple of points. Yeah, that's true. The Democrats, once they passed that civil rights legislation and all that kind of stuff, under the leadership of Lyndon B. Johnson and stuff, the Republicans saw an opportunity. They saw an opportunity to get votes from those people who were angry or hostile towards the civil rights movement. So what they did is they employed that Southern strategy where they exploited race and racism in order to get votes from the South. And a lot of those, Democrats became Republicans, as I said before. Just bear with me a second. Yeah, that's true, Orlando. During that discussion, Jesse Lee Peterson was talking over Tariq Nasheed a lot, and Tucker Carlson does that as well. Um, and yeah, and I did a video talking about that debate between Tucker Carlson and Tariq Nasheed, and it wasn't a good look. I wouldn't advise black people to go on Fox, man. I think that black people should just stop going on that show, on Fox. By doing so, by going on Fox News, they're legitimizing it when it's illegitimate. It's a racist network that panders to races. It is a network that specializes in race baiting and all that kind of stuff. So I would encourage black people not to even go on Fox News. Yeah, I mean, Tariq is cool. I mean, he's just like the stuff that he talks about is just like, I just think that he talks on a more simplistic level than a lot. I mean, and that's part of the reason why he appeals to a lot of people. Like, he doesn't go into the weeds on issues, and he speaks in oversimplified terms and all that kind of stuff. And, he's really not, again, I don't think he's suited for debates. I think he's better as an entertainer and as a comedian or something like that, or just as an entertainer, doing lighthearted things on relationships and all that kind of stuff, as opposed to having like a serious dialogue about race, because it just doesn't. I just think that there's more depth to the issue than he actually presents, but that's just me. So let me go through some more of these comments. Yeah, Lane Lloyd said that I've watched very few of Tariq's videos, but his jokes kind of distract from how superficial his knowledge really is. Yeah, that's true. Like, if you tell a lot of jokes and stuff like that, people aren't going to be focused on what you're actually saying. They're just going to be caught up in the fact that you're entertaining them and stuff like that, instead of going into depth about what you're actually talking about. And he just speaks in real simplistic terms, but I mean, that makes him easier to understand. It's like easier to relate to him and stuff like that. And that's what part of his appeal. That's part of the reason why he appeals to a large group of people. Yeah, and this point that Ron Hall is raising made me think about another thing that they discussed during that uh, debate. And that is this, like, this whole issue about whether or not black people can discriminate. And I may go into that. I'm going to go into that a little bit later. I'm not going to touch on it right now. I want to talk about that later on. But that's an important issue to raise. So Ron Hall said this. He said, "Nowhere in the world do black people make the decisions that rule white people's lives, not even Africa." Hollow Ninja said, "Interview Phil from the Advice." So he said, "Time for y'all to link." I reached out to him a while ago, and it just never materialized. Just bear with me a second. Okay, Elaine Lloyd said that I think that no one can deny white supremacy. They've done studies on how people with black names are treated and how a black hand in an eBay ad, I assume that says that's what she means, gets less views. Okay, so Ron Hall is saying denying white supremacy makes as much sense as insisting that the world is flat. Way too many facts to disprove it. Yeah, I don't think any of us are denying that white supremacy exists. That's something that Jesse Lee Peterson said, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Hollow Ninja said that I should do more videos on pimp pastors. I've done videos on pastors that exploit the community before, but that's not my focus. Like, I don't focus on pastors. I focus on things that actually, like the politicians and, the political system and all that kind of stuff. There are plenty of people that focus on pastors. I know that guy, David Carroll, he loves talking about how pastors are this and pastors are that and stuff like that. Condemning the church as a whole, when the fact of the matter is, even though you do have pastors that exploit the community, you also have churches and pastors that do great things in the community as well. So I'm going to move on to a couple of other points that were raised during this debate between Jesse Lee Peterson and Tariq Nasheed. One point that was kind of raised in jest was, this guy, Jesse Lee Peterson, referring to Donald Trump as the great white hope. And he was just joking around, but he was saying, like, what do you think about Donald Trump, the great white hope? And what's his name? Tariq Nasheed basically said, well, he's a racist and this and that, so he doesn't support him. And then he went on to cite the example of Donald Trump referring to white supremacists as very fine people and stuff like that. And that's basically what he did, because we know that those people that organized that demonstration in Charlottesville were white supremacists. There were no fine people in that group. All of those people were there to preserve a Confederate symbol, a symbol of racism, a symbol of oppression, a symbol of slavery. So there were no fine people in that group, and those people were white supremacists. So this man is a racist, and I've said it over and over again. I've cited example after example, and I won't repeat myself here. So, obviously I agree with Tariq Nasheed's point that Donald Trump is a racist. And for any black person to refer to a damn racist as a great white hope, that black person has to be delusional or sick in the head. And, I'm not surprised that Jesse Lee Peterson would say something like this. This is a man, after all, who thanked God for the enslavement of black people, talking about how it was a blessing to African Americans to be enslaved in America. And I know I have that video, clips of it or a discussion of it somewhere on this channel. When I get a chance, I'll either post a link in the cards or in the description box for those of you who have not seen that video. Now, they talked about this demonstration in Charlottesville. And during that discussion, this guy, Jesse Lee Peterson, was saying, well, these white supremacists, they had the right to demonstrate. They had, the ACLU sued so that they could have a right to demonstrate. And they were just protecting themselves from the haters. That's what he said. They were protecting themselves from the haters. He complained about Antifa coming there. And he asked what were they supposed to do in response to Antifa attacking people and stuff like that. That's what he was saying. When the fact of the matter is, they weren't defending themselves. When that guy, like Tariq Nasheed pointed out, when that guy ran that car into a crowd of people, he wasn't defending himself. He committed murder at that point. When those white supremacists beat that brother to the point where his scalp was ripped and his blood was pouring down his face, they weren't defending themselves. When that white supremacist fired a gun into a crowd of people during that demonstration in Charlottesville, he was not defending himself. These people were terrorizing people. These people were not in a position of being defenseless. They came there with weapons. They came there ready to start trouble. They came there to incite violence. And as I said in my first video on this subject, I think it's a disgrace that the ACLU helped enable those violent terrorists, made it possible for them to commit those crimes that they committed during that demonstration. The ACLU should be ashamed of themselves. And from what I remember, they decided that they were going to change their policies. They would no longer represent groups that engage in violence and stuff like that. But they have blood on their hands. They have blood on their hands for enabling these racists to carry out this demonstration that led to that violence. Now, one thing that Jesse Lee Peterson, out of many things he says that are outrageous, he said that I don't believe in racism. I don't believe that racism exists. I don't believe that white supremacy exists. I just believe in good and evil. I mean, this guy is blind. This guy is refusing to acknowledge reality. We see examples of racism over and over again in this society. I mean, I don't even need to cite examples. We all know that racism is alive and well in America, but yet you have this delusional house Negro, Jesse Lee Peterson, talking about how he doesn't believe that racism and white supremacy exists. He believes that there's only good and evil. And also in this discussion about Donald Trump, Tariq Nasheed brought up the point that Donald Trump has been sued for housing discrimination. He cited that as an example of Donald Trump's racism. And then this guy, Jesse Lee Peterson, had the nerve to ask if everybody discriminates. He says, doesn't everybody discriminate? Doesn't everybody discriminate? And then he said, so he's basically trying to give Donald Trump a pass, suggesting that everybody discriminates and is normal. And Tariq Nasheed basically said, so we're just going to ignore the law, allow people to ignore the law. I mean, the law says that you can't discriminate against people based on their race or their ethnicity when it comes to housing, renting apartments to people or selling homes to people. You can't discriminate based on race. And the fact of the matter is Donald Trump was investigated and charged with housing discrimination by the Justice Department. And we know that the Justice Department, before they bring any suit, they thoroughly investigate it. They're not like some ambulance chasing type of attorney. They are a major law firm that works for the United States, the people in America, to protect the interests of the people of America. And they thoroughly investigated that situation, and they sued this man for housing discrimination twice. So yeah, this man is a racist. And the fact that you had this guy basically trying to make excuses for a racist, for Donald Trump's housing discrimination, is preposterous. When, the fact of the matter is, if that man, Jesse Lee Peterson, tried to rent an apartment from Donald Trump back then when he was discriminating against Black people, he wouldn't have been able to do so. But yet and still, this guy has defended Donald Trump. So those are a couple of things that I wanted to just raise real quick in this quick little live stream. I just wanted to share my thoughts about this interview. I thought it was an interesting interview and discussion. Tariq Nasheed kept it entertaining, with his antics. And, the funniest part was when he gave Jesse Lee Peterson that Coon Award. And and he was talking about how he respects him because he doesn't believe that Jesse Lee Peterson actually believes some of this stuff. He thinks that Jesse Lee Peterson is just hustling these people. And he basically compared Jesse Lee Peterson to Booker T. Washington. He talked about how Booker T. Washington was, basically put on a public show for these white supremacists or white elites to placate them so that they would give him money, and he would use this money to build institutions and also break off a couple of dollars to civil rights activists and stuff like that, while pretending to be so against getting engaged in politics and all that kind of stuff. So I thought that was interesting. I thought it was an interesting discussion. Yeah, so let me see what y'all have to say before I close out. I appreciate y'all tuning in real quick for this live stream. I can't wait till my New Possibilities live streams gets back up and running. So I will be back over there doing my live streams. But for now, I'm going to just chill over here and do some live streams from time to time. Yeah, so Cadillac Gaddafi said that Vice-Show is another fraud trying to appeal to pro-blacks when he's married to a white Latina. And he said, laughing out loud. I mean, yeah, I heard about that. Like, I don't know what his wife looks like or anything like that, but I have heard that she's not white. Not black. She's, non-black or whatever. And it does go counter to this narrative of presenting yourself as like pro-black and all that kind of stuff, and you're married to a non-black woman. I view that as a contradiction, man. Because I think that one thing that I agree with Umar Johnson on is this, when he said that, the most important decision you could make is who you decide to be in a relationship with. That's the most intimate type of decision that you make. And to choose outside of your race, it says a lot about you. It says a lot about your values and stuff like that. It says that you are not a race-first person. You're not a pro-black person in a big scheme of things. You can't be if you choose somebody other than a black woman or a black man. So, yeah, I think that that's a valid point that people raise about that. Like, there is a level of hypocrisy there. Like, when you have a person like a Shannon Sharpe, for instance, going on and on about all these racism issues and this and that, but yet he's laying down every night with a white woman. That's a contradiction. Talking black and sleeping white. In the words of the last poets, man, black power advocates in the day and white thought supporters at night. Every time you see them, they're chasing some white woman with their tongue hanging out of their mouths. It's just hypocrisy, man. And you see that a lot, man. You see these people talking all this black power stuff, and they're sleeping with these white women or in relationships with white women. And the same is true for some black women, man. I did a video a while ago about, you'll see a woman with a natural hair, and some of them even in African attire and stuff like that. And then you see them with a white man. You know what I'm saying? So there's a contradiction there. Something doesn't add up there. Elaine Lloyd said, how is Trump not the great white hope? He's bringing racism to the forefront. He's getting rid of punishment for police violence. He made the KKK and they're like no longer terrorist groups. Yeah, he's the hope for them. Yeah, he is their great white hope. You're right about that. because they needed a great white hope after 8 years of a black man being in the White House, man. So yeah, in a lot of ways, he is their great white hope. He's the one that's supposed to be making America great again, or to be more frank, make America white again, or make America hate again. So yeah, in a lot of ways, you can say that he's their great white hope. But for a black man to be talking about how he's some great white hope, like actually expressing it in a positive kind of way, I think that's kind of demented. And that's what that guy, Jesse Lee Peterson, was doing. Orlando Greenhill said, thank you for keeping it balanced, especially for you and being a Christian. Let's see, what else did he say? Thank you for not being bigoted, and recognizing that they are pastor activists. And he mentions Jeremiah Wright. He also said there's a lot of Christians that are sticking their neck out too. Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of progressive Christians that fight for social justice, that are involved in the movement. There are examples throughout history of black pastors that have done things that are beneficial to the community, that are involved in the struggle for social justice. So I think that too often people paint with a broad brush and they try to condemn an entire religion and all that kind of stuff. And I just think that that's bigoted and narrow-minded, because there are examples of, black people that advocate black pride, black unity, who happen to be Christian. There's a whole tradition called Black liberation theology, where you have people promoting these positive ideas that are beneficial to the black community, that are trying to build and help the black community. So I just think that people are quick to get on a bandwagon of bashing religion. It's like, for some reason, it's become fashionable to bash religion. Some people think that being an atheist or condemning religion, somehow that means that you're so enlightened, that you're so conscious of what's going on, when that's not necessarily the case, man. Plenty of religious people have been instrumental in our struggle. I mean, two of the biggest examples can be cited. Dr. Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. Malcolm X being a devout Muslim and Martin Luther King being a devout Christian. If you look at Nat Turner and the rebellion that he led, inspired by his faith. If you look at even a Marcus Garvey, he was inspired by religion. He was a person of faith. One of the founders of what we view as modern day black nationalism. So I think that too often people are quick to throw out the baby with the bathwater. You have these people on here ranting and raving against religion and against all Christians and all that kind of stuff, not realizing that, it was religious people that helped inspire black people to even think about black consciousness. I mean, if you look at the role that the Nation of Islam played in terms of people having a sense of black pride and black unity, that role is undeniable. The Nation of Islam gave us a Malcolm X, gave us a Farrakhan, people that inspired black people to love themselves and to learn about their history and their culture and stuff. So, I just think that too often people are just quick to condemn without even, thoroughly thinking about things or analyzing things. And that's just the easy route to go. Like, it's easier to just condemn a whole group of people or a whole religion instead of looking at the nuances and the realities of things. Yeah, and yeah, I'm not a Christian. Just to be clear, I'm a Muslim. I don't profess to be, a model Muslim or anything like that. I'm still striving and everything, but I'm a Muslim. I'm not a Christian. Yeah, and that's one thing. I mean, he made it seem like these white supremacists, Jesse Lee Peterson made it seem like these white supremacists were such victims. He made it seem like they were the victims of violence when it was the white supremacists who committed the acts of violence. So I had to mention that. Oh, so that's not the first. I see Hollow Ninja saying that Jesse Lee Peterson called him the Great White Hope in another debate. Wow. I'm gonna have to look up that debate you're referencing. I'm gonna write down that name now. Daryl Lamont Jenkins. And I may actually read that Antifa book and do a review. I'm gonna have to check that out. I've heard a lot about that book. And somewhat, Lane Lloyd asked, "What is Antifa?" Antifa is it stands for anti-fascist. Like it's a whole movement of people who are against fascism and against racism, and they believe in confronting white supremacists at these demonstrations. But that's it in a nutshell. When I get a chance, I'll post a link. I'm gonna make a note of this. Post a link in the description box where there's a brief little documentary. It's like a 5-minute documentary on Antifa and what they stand for and all that kind of stuff. So let me just make a note of that before I close out so that people can learn a little bit more about them. So Elaine Lloyd asked if this will be my only live stream for tonight. Yeah, it is going to be my only live stream. It's so late at night. I mean, here it's not that late, but it's like 11:22 here on the East Coast, and I got to go to work. So I'm going to have to close this out pretty soon. I wish I had more time to talk about more things, but it is what it is. Sometimes I'm just sitting at work and I'm thinking about all these things that I could be talking about and writing about and stuff like that. Um, all right, I see Pure Butterfly Spirit asked if I would vote for Oprah if she runs against Trump. First, she would have to go through a primary, so there will be other Democratic candidates running against her. And also there will be third-party candidates running against her as well. And I did an earlier video on my New Possibilities channel explaining why I wouldn't support her. Even though she's a great person, she's accomplished a lot of great things and all that kind of stuff, I couldn't vote for Oprah Winfrey for a couple of reasons. Number one, she has zero political experience. And I think that before someone occupies the most important office in the country, they need to have some kind of political experience. This woman has never held public office. And we see what is happening now, where you have this president who has zero political experience running the most powerful country on the planet. And we're seeing what a disastrous job he is doing. So for that reason, I want to have somebody in there that knows what they're doing, that has experience with how to deal with the legislature. I mean, we saw how there was a temporary shutdown of the federal government. That's a disgrace. That's a national embarrassment. We're seeing all these rookie mistakes that this president makes time and time again due to his lack of political experience. So we don't need a repeat of that situation. Regardless if someone is left or they're right, I think that they need to have some kind of experience and all that kind of stuff before they take that position. And, that's the main reason why I wouldn't vote for Oprah Winfrey. Despite the fact, I think that she's a good person. And also, in terms of like her public policy experience, the only experience that she's had is endorsing Barack Obama for president. Like, I'm not aware of her pushing for the passage of any important legislation. I'm not aware of that. I'm not aware of her being actively engaged in the movement for social justice, um, aside from her supporting Obama's presidency. And I just think that you need more. I mean, I need more from somebody besides their popularity. I need more from somebody than their fame or their fortune or them being a household name and all that kind of stuff. I need something more than that. One speech that somebody gave at some award show doesn't qualify them to be president of the United States. So that's how I feel about it. You know, I hope there are plenty of other well-qualified Black women who could run for president. You know, for instance, like Kamala Harris, you know, the senator from California. I mean, she would be a great candidate. Um, you have other people that would be great candidates as well. So yeah, I can't support Oprah Winfrey, you know, for president for those reasons. Okay, let me. Yeah, so I'm gonna have to look up that debate you're referencing. Yeah, so I'm gonna look into that debate. I may review that one as well. Yeah, Oprah Winfrey is you know, she's accomplished a lot, you know, but that doesn't make her a good presidential candidate. I mean, being a billionaire is not enough. I mean, that's good. I mean, it's great. That's a great personal accomplishment, being a billionaire and having all these connections and this and that. That doesn't make you a qualified to be president, you know. Um, Hosting a talk show is not a qualification for the presidency. Just like this guy, Donald Trump, he's not qualified to be president. Oh, I see Orlando Greenhill said that he knows that I'm a Muslim. And he said he thanks me for having great balance. Well, I want to thank you all for tuning in. You know, I appreciate your support. With that, I'm going to say peace and blessings and good night.